Well, tonight we're going to take another look at this measles madness. It's spread across the country. Another daycare facility shut down due to the disease, and doctors now in New Jersey keeping a close eye on a suspected measles case in Jersey City. We'll be joined here by a New York Assemblywoman to tell us where that line is when it comes to this vaccination battle, and also open questions about liability and obviously public health. And Mayor Bill de Blasio's top aide stepping down. It's the latest shakeup within the de Blasio administration. But we have a broader question. How do elected officials move forward when one of the most trusted aides leaves the office, especially unexpectedly? Plus, get this, Illinois Congressman Aaron Schock, he made headlines this week over his Downton Abbey-inspired office. Now, one of his top advisors is also resigning after making just impossibly racist comments on Facebook. Should politicians be responsible for what their employees are actually saying when it comes to social media? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we're going to begin here with the measles outbreak that is continuing to spread. More than 102 patients infected, with more cases propping up all around the country, and that's just since the beginning of this calendar year. Now we got a major autism organization that is also weighing in. More cases of measles continue to spread across America. 5 babies believed to be infected in a daycare outside of Chicago. In Santa Monica, 1 confirmed case and 14 more infants that are under quarantine, and another baby awaiting test results in New Jersey. This outbreak, the latest in a disease that had been eliminated from the United States.
Is it a possibility that this measles outbreak will in fact become much bigger than it is already?
I think it's going to become a lot bigger than it is right now. There are pockets of communities where a lot of parents have decided not to vaccinate. Those are ticking time bombs.
The CDC says that measles are highly contagious. One person with the virus can spread to between 12 and 18 people. An unvaccinated person has a 90% chance of catching it if they are exposed. So why have an increasing number of parents opted not to vaccinate their children?
There's certain medical conditions where you can't get a vaccine, but they're very, very rare. Vaccines are one of the best things we can do to protect our children's health.
Even Autism Speaks, the preeminent autism advocacy group, says vaccines do not cause autism. We urge that all children be fully vaccinated, end quote. But for every anti-vaccination parent saying this
doesn't seem necessary to me.
There's another parent saying this.
If they're going to be around other children, they should keep them all safe.
And that Santa Monica daycare, it has reopened its doors today, but those doors are only open to children who have been previously vaccinated. The Jersey City Department of Health here and the State Department of Health say 1-year-old baby who is suspected of having measles has recovered. However, residents in the building where the infant lives, they've been notified about the potential exposure. And just this week, Governor Christie, he came out supporting parents in their right to decide whether their child should or should not be vaccinated.
Much more important, I think, what you think as a parent than what you think as a public official. And that's what we do. But I also understand that parents need to have some measure of choice in things as well. So that's the balance that the government has to decide.
However, the office of the governor quickly did, if not a 180, certainly a pivot, releasing the following statement, quote, "There is no question children should be vaccinated." And other lawmakers have similarly maybe backtracked to a degree, but not all. In fact, New York State Assemblyman Tom Abbinanti, you see there, he spoke with our own Andrew Whitman this week about the measles outbreak. And Abbinanti, a Democrat in the Assembly, who he himself has an autistic child, is actually pushing for a bill that would allow additional vaccine exemptions.
Tell me what the bill does and why you're sponsoring it.
Okay, let me start off with, I am pro-choice, not anti-vaccine. So I am sponsoring a bill which allows what we term a philosophical exemption. And the intent is to broaden the present religious exemption to people who do not have their conscientious objection founded in a specific religion.
And you can catch Andrew's full interview on Newsbreakers this weekend on Fios 1. Now, I want to bring in our panel right now. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Shelley Mayer, Democratic New York State Assemblywoman representing the city of Yonkers. And Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent who you just saw there. Assemblywoman, what would you rate the chances of increasing additional exemptions for parents if they don't want to vaccinate their children. The philosophical exemption Mr. Abenanti spoke of is pretty open-ended. Basically, if you don't want to do it, you don't do it.
Well, one of the real problems with his bill, in my opinion, and he's a colleague from Westchester and we border each other, is that under his bill, there would simply be a checkoff saying I have a philosophical objection.
Yep.
Obviously you need a religious exemption, and there is one. It's narrowly tailored to those who have true religious objections. My concern is that you have this very broad philosophical objection. You will open the door against the science, which is quite clear that vaccinating is good for public health, it's good for your child and other children. So my view is I support mandatory vaccination with exceptions for religion. There are some health conditions that preclude having it. But this general philosophical objection, I mean, I know Tom is a passionate advocate and he has a Senate sponsor. I think it will provoke a conversation. I'd be very surprised if there's an appetite to go down the path that he's suggesting.
In terms of the practical day-to-day applications, we've seen doctors who say, you know what, right on their door, if you haven't vaccinated your kid, don't come in my waiting room. School saying, you don't vaccinate your kid, don't come through the front doors here. I got no problem with any of that. Do you think that people should basically be able to shut people out if they've chosen and they made the personal choice not to vaccinate for no good reason?
Well, I think we have science and we have public health. We have all kinds of rules that are in the collective interest, not only of me and my child, in my opinion, and I'm not talking about a medical opinion, my philosophical, which really means my personal opinion, but we have all kinds of public health rules. We have no smoking in office buildings anymore, notwithstanding that it impinges my personal freedom. Public health is a scientifically based decision about what is best collectively, and I think that we cannot broaden the exemption. I think we should explain to parents the benefits of, and maybe do a better job of vaccinating, but I don't see that this sort of truly anti-scientific, in my opinion, march against public health makes sense.
I'm not even sure how much explaining you need to do. I mean, it's
how much more
it stops people from getting the measles, and it's for. I mean, I think the requirements, the mandatory requirements, probably go far enough. Yeah, it might make people chafe, but while I respect Assemblyman Abenanti, and we had an interesting conversation that you can see this weekend on Files 1 Hudson Valley. At some point, it begins to break down the entire value of having the vaccine in the first place, because. And without getting too technical, if you go below a threshold where
90%.
not enough people are vaccinated, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't stop the spread of the disease, and that's where we're starting to see it pick up going forward. And at some point, and I made this comment the other day in one of our meetings, you can't bring a peanut butter sandwich to a public school anymore, but you can carry measles? I mean, it's absurd. And while I feel, again, for every parent of special needs, particularly parents of autism, we have autism in my family, I understand that concern, and that leads to a lot of these decisions when it comes to things like vaccines, but the greater good has to be considered as well.
Now, I know you've talked before, you've been open that, well, obviously you don't have a child with autism.
But I do have a special needs
son. Yeah, you have a
son
special needs.
with epilepsy.
The communities are very tight because it's a shared experience few can relate to unless you live through it on the day-to-day, right? Do you understand how these communities feel insular and that they can, not to justify it, but that they believe that, unless you live our life, you don't know, and they're almost looking for a reason, for a connection?
I don't understand that. I really don't, Richard. I see this entire debate from my perspective as silly. It's almost like arguing, oh, well, forget what science says. I believe that secondhand smoke and smoke is good for me, and so I should be able to smoke anyway. That's what the argument sounds like to me. When it comes down to epilepsy, my son, as you know, from when he was an infant, many of the medications that he must take on a daily basis so that he doesn't, it's a cocktail of medications, so that he doesn't have seizures, many of them are psychiatric drugs that are used for psychiatric patients. So am I not to give my son the medication to stop the seizures because of the epilepsy, because of the psychological ramifications? I mean, We can all nitpick at something and say, no, we shouldn't do it because I don't agree with it. It's called for the greater good, as the Assemblywoman said, and it's called public health. This whole argument is silly.
And for me, for the issue I take is, for anyone, and I've had a couple conversations where people say, well, you know, there's two schools of thought. I'm like, no, there's not. We can, in today's day and age, ascribe motivations to everybody for everything. We live in a cynical time, and I get that. But the CDC is not a political operation. The American Medical Association, their definition is the Hippocratic Oath, right? It's to look out for the health. Autism Speaks, the preeminent organization for autism, they say there's no connection to it at all. At some point, you have to believe somebody, and it can't just be somebody who's later discredited for coming up with a random theory and wanting to attach it. And for me, the danger of celebrating conspiracy in the face of fact, and it's not just limited to this debate. It's part of a real problem. I mean, as silly as it sounds, how long did we spend in this country talking about the legitimacy of a president because somebody said that he wasn't a U.S. citizen? And we actually had conversations about this, not just on Talk TV, but so long. We waste so much time. And I'm not minimizing for the poor families of children with autism in particular, but at some point science has to take over.
Well, Richard, the other point we're not talking about, we had eliminated this disease.
Yeah.
Incredible. We had, credit to science and a public health infrastructure that by mandating inoculation and having this high degree of compliance, we got a disease outside of that no longer is listed in America. Now it's coming back. I mean,
and we're so far removed from when it was such a problem that
Yes.
people don't recall what it did. And there are other diseases.
I'm joking. Polio, right? Are we going to debate this one too?
Well, I mean, given enough time with people limiting exposure to it and not being able to see how damaging it actually is, you'll probably get people who are like, nah, we don't really need a polio vaccine.
We asked our audience this week to answer this question, and there's been a ton of comments. I wanted to just get to a few of them here that stood out to us. As we open up our mailbag, we're going to start off with Brad. And Brad says, open your eyes, people. Anti-vax is harmful to my child, who is 8 years old with immune deficiency. A compromised immune system like those with cancer and other illnesses are at risk of catching these illnesses, such as measles, even if they've personally been vaccinated. Vaccines do work. That's why they haven't had outbreaks in the last 15 years. Elizabeth writes, what about entire classes not being able to bring in anything with peanut in it because one child has an allergy? Andrew mentioned that point earlier. That's okay, but having kids not vaccinated that may expose others as preventable diseases okay? Don't get it. Heather writes, there's no way to prove who infected who. Unvaccinated kids shouldn't be allowed in schools unless they have a documented medical need for going without. And there's a lot more comments you can see online, and we suggest you chime in as well with your comments as well.
And just to point out, there is a religious exemption under New York law. It isn't only medical need. If there are the Amish and there's other groups that, although I think they may have changed some of their positions on it, they traditionally do not accept it.
And it's clearly defined, right?
It's not as clear as it should be, in my opinion, but I don't think it's abused. I think it's by people who have sincere religious
It's the philosophical,
objections.
which is basically, if you don't feel like doing it, you don't do it.
As I said.
And as I said, if you want to sound off, please do so. Just go over to Facebook and Twitter and answer our question. And actually, tonight, we are not going to be doing a traditional question. What we're going to do is we're going to be asking you questions here. And yes, there are prizes involved every Friday here. Coming up later in the show, we're going to quiz you on the week's current events. Just call the number on your screen. You see the toll-free number there. The phone lines are open, 888-766-2428. And we'll be going through those questions. And if you answer correctly, oh, yes, there are prizes here. The mug.
Dominic's mug? The one that he's drinking out of?
No, you'll get a clean one. Coming up next, though, we will get into some politics. One of de Blasio's top advisors leaving City Hall, but more than that particular move, politicians, by definition, can have to trust a select group of people. And when there's a defection in the office, how much of an impact does it have? We'll talk about that and a lot more on the political side after this.